Welcome to the Hazard Assessment and Control Training session. There are a number of objectives to this training session. Why do hazard assessments? The type of hazard assessments. The 3 steps in hazard assessment, which includes hazard identification, risk rating, and the hierarchy of hazard controls. We will be reviewing job inventory formal hazard assessment process, how to complete a field level hazard assessment, and finally, there is a quiz attached to this training session, which is provided in site docs. Hazard assessments are fundamental to our health and safety program. Everything we do is associated with the hazards. I want you to think about a hazard assessment as building a house. Improperly identifying hazards is like not having a solid floor plan. We don't have a strong foundation, our house will be unstable or collapse. This is the same for our health and safety program. If we don't conduct a thorough hazard assessment, the consequence are incidents. Each worker has a duty to participate in them under the Alberta OHS legislation. What this means is that there may be consequences if you do not participate in them when required. There are some benefits with conducting hazards, which do not include just meeting legislative requirements. The first is to inspire improvement in day-to-day operations. It is a demonstration to you that your safety matters to us. It creates a more consistent, efficient, and effective workplace, and it actually lowers operating costs. There are 2 different types of formal hazard assessment. The first is a formal hazard assessment. This document takes an overall view of an organization to identify hazards and develops, implements, and monitors related controls. Field level hazard assessments, also called site-specific hazard assessments, are used to address hazards that show up because of changing circumstances at a work site. We will be going into detail about how each one of these 2 types of hazard assessments are completed. Before we begin looking into how to complete or review a hazard assessment, it is important to understand the steps in the process of a hazard assessment. The first step is the identification process. There are a number of ways we will identify a hazard. The second step is used only in the formal hazard assessment process. It is risk rating the hazard. Risk rating allows for prioritization of the hazard. That is, a hazard which is high rated needs to be addressed first, and so on. The last step is controlling a hazard for the purpose of mitigating the risk of the hazard from hurting you, property, or the environment. There are 2 types of hazards. Health hazard is anything that could harm someone's health either immediately or over time. These types of hazards can take years to appear. For this reason, health hazards themselves are often overlooked in the hazard assessment process. A safety hazard is anything that could cause injury or damage. An injury caused by a safety hazard is usually immediate. For example, a broken bone, a sprain, or a cut. Safety hazards tend to get our attention in a hurry. When someone falls and breaks their back, for example, everyone takes note. The identification of health and safety hazards can be broken down by the use of 4 categories: physical, chemical, biological, and psychosocial. Physical hazards are the ones we are used to seeing in front of us. Chemical hazards are substances that can cause harm to people or environment. Biological hazards, or biohazards, are living organisms that can harm humans, animals, or the environment. Psychosocial hazards are aspects of work which can affect workers' emotions, behavior, biochemical, or neurohormonal balance. It is the interrelationships between the individual's thoughts and behaviors and their social environment. There are 4 main contributing factors to how hazards impact a workplace and the workers: people, equipment, materials, and environment. Each of these factors contribute to a hazard being present. Now let's turn our thoughts to the second step in this hazard assessment process. This is risk rating. Let's watch a short video on the difference of hazard and risk rating, as it is common to consider that they are the same.
If we were to cross the road here, the hazard is being hit by a moving vehicle. Part of doing a hazard identification is looking at the potential consequence. In this case, it could be a serious fatality.
But we're on a country road. I mean, the chances of being hit look pretty slim.
Right. That's part of the risk assessment. Because the traffic flow is very minimal, the risk is low.
Whoa! But if we were trying to cross the road here, the hazard is much worse.
Nope. The hazard is the same, and so is the potential consequence of a fatality. It's the risk that's changed. It's now higher because the traffic flow is much heavier.
Okay. The hazard is the thing or condition that can hurt us. In this case, the vehicle. And the risk is the likelihood that the hazard will cause injury or disease. So, what does that have to do with the regulation?
Hazards arise out of the work environment and work tasks. And until you know what the hazards are, you can't determine the risks. In the workplace, you have to identify hazards and then assess the risk they pose. For example, if you were pulling a heavy box off a high shelf, what are the hazards?
Well, if the box was stacked poorly, it could fall on you.
Or you might strain your back lifting the box. Try to climb up, you might fall.
Wow, I didn't realize moving one box could involve so many hazards.
Right. There are often many hazards associated with a single task, and we need to assess the risk for each of them.
Our risk rating matrix consists of adding severity and probability together to arrive at a risk rating. Green means a low risk, yellow means a medium risk, red means a high risk. Let's turn to the last step in the assessment process, controlling hazards. It is called the hierarchy of hazard control. The hierarchy of hazard control is a system to reduce the hazard from hurting you, property, or the environment. They must be implemented in the order stated. Let's take a look at each control method in a little more detail. Engineering controls are implemented directly at the source of the hazard. They vary from work site to work site. Administrative controls are along the pathway to the worker. There are a number of administrative controls that we have in place. As it has been mentioned, the last line of defense is PPE, personal protective equipment. For chemicals, the PPE requirements are listed in the safety data sheets. Now that we have an understanding of hazard and hazard controls, let's turn our attention to formal assessments. We have two types of formal hazard assessments. One is called a job inventory formal hazard assessment, and the other is called a work process formal hazard assessment. The job inventory formal hazard assessment has been developed by definition, job position, which we have in our organizational chart. We have a corresponding job description for each job position, and finally, we have determined the tasks that are required to fulfill the requirements in a job description. The work process formal hazard assessment takes hazards associated with equipment, machinery, or tools in addition to work processes. All of these documents can be found in the resource section in Site Docs. We have a number of what we call triggers for the review of formal hazard assessments. The first is you are required to review your job position's formal hazard assessment annually. We usually do this in January. Other triggers are when changes are made to the operation or work-related process, when a new work process is introduced, when a field-level hazard assessment identifies a new hazard, when an inspection identifies a new hazard, when an investigation identifies a new hazard, and are completed during the orientation process for a new worker. Just to let you know, the work process formal hazard assessment gets reviewed every 3 years. How the review process works is, step 1, you will be assigned to review and sign your hazard assessment form through Site Docs. It will tell you what form and when it is due date. How the review process works is, step 1, You will be assigned to review and sign your hazard assessment form through Site Docs. It will tell you what form and when it is due. It will appear on your main dashboard. Step 2. Click on the review document. Step 3. Open the viewed resource. This is our formal hazard assessment. It will list all of the hazards, risk rating, and controls for your job position. We have at the bottom a list of other work process formal hazards which may be applicable. Step 4, click the sign icon, and finally step 5, sign and save. The reviewing of our formal hazard assessment process is complete. Now that we have covered how to review formal hazard assessments, let's look on how to complete a field level hazard assessment. FLHAs for short. This is done in Site Docs. FLHAs are completed when a new activity has been temporarily introduced at a work site, work is conducted at a temporary mobile work site, whether owned by Gabriel Industries or not, and at reasonable practical intervals to prevent the development of unsafe and unhealthy working conditions, or in other words, the scope of the work has changed. To begin an FLHA, select the Form function, which can be selected from the bottom screen, circled in red here. Click on the FLHA selection, circled in purple here. A new screen will appear, and you have 4 options. Each option provides you with an opportunity to create a new one, amend the form, duplicate it, or view previously signed ones. We are going to focus on creating a new FLHA. So click on New. The address will be the address when you first signed into Site Docs. If you need to change the address, click on Switch and select the correct location. Enter the site-specific information. If the line states required, it means that if you don't complete, the form will not save properly. Enter the task that you are doing. If the task changes from the original task, click on the Repeat this section and a new task line will appear. We have gone through hazards that we commonly encounter and have created a drop-down list of possible options for you. When you click on the Select Multiple button, the drop-down list will list hazards. Click on all applicable hazards and click Done. Now that we have identified the hazards at our work site, we need to enter the controls that we implemented to reduce the risk of the hazard. We have created a drop-down list, just like the hazard one, taking the hierarchy of hazard control into consideration. Once you have completed all of the control selection, click on Done. The last section of the form is Change/Identify New Hazard section. The instructions are prescriptive. The first question is mandatory to complete. The last step is signing and saving the form. Click on the Sign and Save button and follow the prompts. You have now finished the training video. Please proceed on now to complete the quiz.